This is no-nonsense agile leadership, where we explore better ways to develop digital products and services. Join world-class experts for honest insights and practical advice to help you lead digital teams clearly and confidently. Subscribe now to learn the best ideas in the field.
Welcome to No Nonsense Agile Leadership. I'm Murray Robinson.
I'm Donna Spencer.
And I'm Christian Crumlish.
Hi, Christian. Thanks for coming on.
Good to be here.
We want to talk to you about using AI tools for developing products. But before we do that, can you just tell us a bit about who you are and what your background and experience is?
Sure. I've been doing internet since the 90s. I've had many titles, starting with content strategist and information architect, which is my core lens. And then a lot of interaction design, UX type titles for a while before I figured out I wanted to do product management. And then a lot of product titles. I ended up working in government on the civic tech side of things, most recently at 18F in the federal government before that team was deleted. And then now working for Kind Systems in California as their director of product and leading a project over at the VA.
We want to talk to you about using AI tools for product development because it's something that you've been talking about a bit recently. So tell us what you've been doing, Christian.
Or seeing as well. What are you seeing other people doing?
I feel like a lot of the people from the broader UX-oriented community that I'm still very rooted in have had a healthy skepticism about AI, a lot of concern about the ethical boundaries and values of the money and the forces driving its development and the way it's being developed, a lot of corners they cut, acquiring their training data, and a lot of ways that people's work is being plagiarized or commodified or devalued. There are people losing jobs right now. If you used to make little illustrations for a living, you're out of work right now. If you unfortunately worked on a content farm generating throwaway content for Yahoo News, you're out of business as well. Putting aside all the hype and the misrepresentation of what LLMs do, one thing they definitely do is parse language. They manipulate language better than a lot of humans do. And so on a very simple level, we can talk to computers. Ironically, we're still on a command line because we're typing and people are still wondering what's the GUI of this going to be like. So if you worked in UX, you can say, I don't like Grok, I don't like the people behind OpenAI, but it's a little bit like saying, I'm not going to learn how to work with dialog boxes. I'm a command line person and this whole GUI thing, it's all corporate and I hate it. You can have that point of view, but you wouldn't have been very involved in computers for the next couple of decades if you didn't pick up how to do that. And so I feel like if you just work in this field, it started to be obvious that you need to at least understand what can and can't these things do.
Yeah, it's become an expectation of a lot of jobs now that people will use AI to help them. And I think the expectations are, from what I'm reading, extremely unrealistic.
I think there's a lot of dangerous, destructive patterns of engagement that are really being put out in a thoughtless way to make money. But I do think that there's a broad general use case possible if you learn how to do this. And some people are teaching themselves to use some of these LLMs as a thinking partner, smart notebook. I'm a scattered person. I've got a lot of piles and things in the air and different lists and stuff like that. And rather than fighting that, I found that having a broad general chat with a language machine and saying, here's all the stuff in my head, and I'm losing track. And it talks to me. And in the end, helps me make a list and figure out what's actionable today or something like that. And I could have done that by pulling up my Trello board or looking in my notes or all the other millions of ways I stay organized. It's just another thing. But I think of it as like a little notebook where instead of writing my list, I go, notebook, make me a list that helps me figure out what to do today. And it's no more magical than that, but that's a little magical. And a lot of people, I think, use that in their job. I've got to write a note to my boss, ChatGPT. How should I write it? I think a lot of people, that's the base level usage you're seeing out there.
Yeah, I wanted to get into how you're using it to design and build a product.
I'm developing a piece of software. I call it Piper Morgan. If it works, it's supposed to help product managers do their jobs by leveraging AI methods. I don't really know how to write code, although I'm learning some Python as I watch it happen. The actual development is being done by a Claude Code agent in my terminal inside my Cursor app, and also by a Cursor agent in its own chat. I'm helping to plan the day with my chief architect persona. I'm helping to run the development session with my lead developer persona. They're working against a plan and methodology that they are required to review every session. They get a handoff from their predecessor chat because it got too full or whatever, and the session log from the predecessor session. They get an overview plan, but also strict step-by-step prompts from the supervising bot that knows the overall plan and is talking to me about this stuff. Lately, I've been trying to introduce more discipline of opening up the GitHub ticket properly, checking all the checkboxes properly, closing it all up, and updating all the documentation properly. These things are blind. So every time they wake up, they have to get oriented and find what they're doing.
What are the features that this thing is doing that is like product manager work? What is it helping with?
If it works, it will help a PM with the more or less routine tasks that scale pretty easily and are relatively templatized. So write a pretty good GitHub ticket based on a template and a body of documented knowledge about a project and what it's about and who's working on it and things like that. Who has to approve this? It's the product owner. That's listed somewhere else. So it wrote pretty good tickets.
Like user stories?
No, not user stories, more in the format of the definition of success. So the second feature is like to look at a GitHub ticket and suggest improvements to the description that could help make it more thorough and useful, and also write a comment about the recommended changes. And then I ran an experiment with one of my coworkers, a UX person who typically don't love writing GitHub tickets. And I said, would you mind if I let my little bot read your ticket and make suggestions? And she said, sure, of course, whatever. So we ran that little experiment and it was mildly helpful. At this point, I started piling on more context. I uploaded my whole book, the Rosenfeld book, the Products for UX People, up into it. So it knew about how I think product and UX should work together and use that as a guide while writing these tickets. I wanted to be able to tell it, what is this about? This is about product management. No, this is an org chart at the VA. And as I started to do that, it got confused and the context started blurring and it was struggling with the features that we were building. I'm like making spaghetti code. I'm bolting features onto a GitHub machine. So at that point I stopped and I talked to like smart bots again, like Claude, but also Gemini and a couple others. I actually told them this scenario. I said, oh, like an enthusiastic PM and an engineer have built this over the weekend and they're going around the company telling everybody it's production ready. I had it generate a bunch of docs to describe what we built so far. And it was hyping it like, we don't need engineers anymore. Oh, it's not true. And I said, you're the senior principal chief architect. You've seen it all. Is there anything actually in there? And if so, what's the right way to do this? And so I got these plans that were like, you need a model, you need a domain, you need to really think it through. This is the architecture, boom, boom. And then Gemini said, oh, what you need to do is this. And it gave another architecture. It's close, but different. And eventually I had another Claude Opus like adjudicate through several different, and they're good at that. They love a Hegelian, like, well, A, B, how about C with a little or both? But you always like C because it's synthesized and good. So that was my new plan. Throw away the 1 week prototype, start over. It took me about 2 months to get back to feature parity with the prototype, but enterprise grade. So there's a whole journey in between and figuring out how to do that and constantly discovering problems and creating crutches and then eventually protocols and then leveling them up.
So it sounds like your product, Piper Morgan, you're trying to automate it to do what you would do as a product manager.
This might work. What do you give an intern?
All right. So now I'd like to go through how you're doing this, what tools you're using. So first thing I heard is that you are using Opus, Sonnet, and Cursor.
Yeah, Opus and Sonnet are models of Claude. Claude Code is a version of Claude that runs in your command line so it can see all your files. It doesn't guess about what to do as much. And then Cursor is another agent that under the hood does its own thing with multiple models.
Yeah. So I'm building a product as well. Let's just say that it's a survey tool for businesses. I started by using ChatGPT to discuss a product idea I had. And It was very supportive and encouraging. And it told me that this was a great idea, had great potential. I thought I'd start with a pitch deck to potential investors and partners and use that as a framework to flesh out what a product would be. It's like the business case and all that stuff. I've done pitch decks before. I know what they are. You have to have them to raise funding or to get resources. So I did that, and it was sometimes really good and sometimes really stupid. And it kept pushing me towards something very generic all the time. My conclusion from that was really it had taken everything that's out there on the internet and averaged it and found that most relevant average to what I was doing and said it should be like this. So it was always constantly pushing me towards an average. It was quite mediocre. And I would ask it, review it from this point of view. If you're an executive, what would you think? If you're an investor, what would you think? If you're a management consultant, what would you think? And that was somewhat helpful, but I had to do a considerable amount of work and thinking on my own. So it was very iterative. I wouldn't say that the AI developed my pitch deck at all, but I would say it acted like a coach, a consultant, an advisor.
Sometimes it's helpful to get them to prompt you. In other words, rather than trying to make them write stuff for you, which comes out, like you said, generic and bland, sometimes they're better at telling you what to write about or what to answer. It turns the process on its head in a way, but it keeps the language in your mouth. Because it's really riffing on what you're saying mixed with generic internet mayonnaise. So all the goodness is coming out of your head in the first place anyway.
Yeah, I'd recommend people ask it to help you build a business case for funding. That was really helpful.
That's like all those models in UX where you design the ad campaign, design the package, envision what success looks like, and then reverse engineer how you could have got there somehow.
Yeah, define your problem, define the solution, define your unique sales proposition, how much money and resources you might need, what the potential is, who the competitors are, all that sort of stuff, and do it in a way that you can communicate. So that was good. Then I wanted to try and build it because I used to be a back-end developer back in the 80s. I've dabbled with a bit of front end from time to time since then.
But you never lose the concept. Whether you know the current incantations and the exact stack of today, I think there's a basic familiarity that doesn't really go away. Even when you're coding with AI, it is helpful to see that those are still API calls or those are still modular functions that then are still wrapped by stuff that has to be traditional scaffolding to tame these little beasts. So their craziness doesn't get outside of that one little.
Christian, had you done coding before?
I've never written code professionally, and I don't know that I could.
Yeah.
Because I'm too sloppy of a person in my execution of life generally. I've done script kiddie stuff and grabbed some JavaScript and hacked my own. I've done view source all my life. One of the things I was talking to Christina Woodkey about was that this is like a view source on steroids moment for a certain generation of us who got access to interface making just by peeking at websites and going, I can do that. This is like view source in the sense that the bots are doing it for me, but they'll explain it to me too. We discuss, why are you doing it that way? What does that mean? And they want to geek out more than I do, really, if you talk to them about it. Honestly, like my first level goal was learn stuff. My second level goal was share about it. Third level for me is it actually works and is useful for me. That would be like huge. And I'm getting close to that maybe, although I might be hyping myself because I'm talking to bots a lot. If it ever gets useful for me, clearly there's another thing of, can I generalize this for other people? But that's like fourth level success.
I wanted to get back into programming and I didn't know how. So I thought I'll just start with what I know and just push towards the programming side using the AI tools to help me. And they have.
It got you over the blank page, didn't it? Which is what I'm hearing from both of you, getting over the blank page, getting your ideas looping, getting feedback on them.
I haven't written a line of this code. I only typed one line of it. Originally, it was a lot of copy paste. And eventually I was like, give it to me verbatim, because competence as a copy paste monkey was above my skill level. So I kept saying, make it easier, until I finally was working with agents that see the code and can just do it. Often it would tell me what to do. And I'm like, can't you do it? And it would do it for me. So every single line of code was written by one of these bots. I've watched them do it. I've seen it be debugged. I've discussed the architecture and what the different modules do. I've learned a lot about Python, a lot about domain-driven design and test-driven development and other things that I've really only heard about as a colleague of engineers. A side effect of this as a product and UX person is that it's actually built a lot of empathy for me about the day-to-day lived experience of engineers. There's all this scary thing of now my work is commodified, but there's this other thing of now everybody else's job is a thing that you can dabble in without hiring a professional. And so actually any of our jobs is a point of view from which you can do a lot of the adjacent stuff. If you embrace assistance in the areas that you are not an expert in, but you're staying an expert in your area. So like I'm heavily product managing these bots. Like that's how the project works, is that I act like a product manager and I go, you did not meet the acceptance criteria.
So I went through that journey you've gone through. I struggled with infrastructure for a long time to get that working. Then I went from pitch deck to high level product specification, and then picked off a component and said, here's the spec for this, build this for me. And usually it does something that seems to work. And then you start going through it. And there are two things that happen. First of all, you discover there's a whole lot of business rules that you didn't tell it about, which is what happens in the real world anyway.
A lot of these breakdowns are modeled on human breakdowns because the language is modeled on human language. Typos are in the typos. The miscommunications are human miscommunications that are in the record that they all learned from.
True. Now, the big problem I had with it was that I found that the AI would make an assumption about a business rule or a technical implementation. And then when I said something was wrong, it would build around that wrong assumption with a very complex infrastructure without ever challenging the basic assumption. And then I would have to really dive heavily into debugging and looking at code.
One of my work streams was debugging, but we recently agreed that's just a subtopic of development because we aren't debugging stuff all day long anymore like it used to be, because I finally did put in enough disciplinary things. There's a lot of regression testing, there's test-driven development, there's a lot of verification first, a lot less of fantasizing and making stuff up and guessing. I'm not saying everything's bug-free, but no longer is debugging a major part of the job like it was for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the project. Do you feel like you now have put in guardrails or other methods so that you don't spend as much time debugging, or is that still a thing that's plaguing your development day?
Yeah, I once spent a month trying to debug a user registration process, which was somewhat complex. But what I've done now, which is much better, is saying, here's what I think it's supposed to do. Have a look at the code and tell me if this is what it's actually doing. Are there any other functions that I've forgotten about? Are there any other logic I've forgotten about? Help me write the pseudocode. Then it follows it really well. And that helps a great deal with it doing what I want without deep accent. And also I've been asking it to write tests for me. Let's develop this part of it and give me a test for it. And that's helped quite a lot, I would say.
Our kind of testing journey too, everything from watching Cursor run a test and then go, oh, it's not passing. So then changing the test so that it passes, or getting it to pass with a mock, but not anything real. And then we started getting really into test-driven development, where literally you write the test first, and then the test failed by design. And then you make the test pass with a mock, and then you enrich it with real stuff. And that was a very good discipline. It slowed us down, but it also sped us up by not having so much debugging. But then I went through a period where I built a whole feature and every single unit test passed, but we had not done any integration testing. So every unit worked, but all the contracts between the units were broken. So then there was a whole layer of integration. I was never a developer professionally, that I'm almost certainly recapitulating the modern history of software development, like just by discovering one mistake at a time. Like I wasn't in an IDE for the first couple of weeks. I was just opening up terminals in my window and grabbing stuff out of my Finder until I realized, oh, this is why people have clean rooms and not messy rooms, or else I'll be recreating my day from scratch every time. The amnesia they had, I have it too. I don't have a good memory. I forget where we were. I'm not sure we really did that thing yesterday. So a lot of the failings of these bots are not that different from human frailties, where you do have to check in with your team and remind them what's going on. It turns out getting help from bots is not 100% different from getting help from human beings. They're not gods or genies. They don't know what you think. But because language is the way we're working with them, it turns out the way that you deal with things through language to get what you want from other people or to help them understand what you need, those same skills turn out to be useful.
Yes and no, in my opinion. If I hired a software developer and I ended up having to write pseudocode for them, I would fire them, because I think they should be able to ask me questions about what the requirements are. And I accept that I will miss requirements and then that will mean extra things for them to do. But I expect any decent software developer to communicate effectively with me and partner with me to at least define the requirements enough so that they can build it, and then to mostly build what they said.
They're not full partners. They're junior partners at best. They're not real full partners for sure. But again, it's much cheaper than that offshore team. And so you get what you pay for.
Tell me about how you've been implementing TDD.
I think there's two ways that we're doing it. We backed off on being doctrinaire and using it for everything, because sometimes we're just flying through now and things are going okay. But especially when we were so buggy and everything, we were following very strict TDD. There's this cascading pattern where I have a chat with this architect persona that is helping me at the planning level. What should we build next? Have we got the foundation ready? What's left that we still need for the MVP? And more of an operational process conversation going on where I'm constantly trying to improve how the process works. Like the same way in the real world, you retro with your team all the time and you constantly try to tighten up how things are working. Why did that happen? Can we make that not happen anymore? That thing that keeps happening? I do a lot of that. I'm using that instinct all the time. And so then that becomes something like a game plan. Like I'll say, okay, here's the plan for today. We've got the spatial intelligence feature. We're now refactoring our GitHub integration so it uses the spatial intelligence model that we built. Here's the plan today, how we're going to build the new one, and here's the plan to how to deprecate the old one. And then I have this lead developer persona that I burn through much more quickly. Like in one day, I'll use up a whole chat with Sonnet, just supervising the development day. And that one has some continuity from before. It has the game plan from the chief architect of what we're doing with a lot of pro tips and guidance. It has a lot of special context in the project knowledge about its role as a lead developer and how it's supposed to be careful and check everything. And then it works out with me a series of steps that we can distribute to the team. So for instance, often the Cursor agent is writing the tests. Its job is to write a whole bunch of unit tests that are going to work if the thing we built to spec is correct and should fail now because nothing's been built. And it'll write those tests and it'll run all the tests and go, as expected, they're all failing. What do you want me to do next? And meanwhile, the Claude Code bot is now writing at least some of those features. So when they both report in, I'll take the report up to my lead developer and say, Cursor says it's done. What can it do now while Claude Code is still busy? Can we give Cursor something? Yeah, Cursor could go do, and then we give it some other assignment to keep doing. And then when the code is done, then they'll say, okay, Cursor, run the test. Claude Code says it runs fine. It just fulfilled all the requirements. And then Cursor runs and says, actually, it's not passing test number 4. So there's this discipline on the process.
So are you using a different AI tool for each of these personas?
Well, a lot of these are instances of Claude. They're on their own track with their own context and prompts that are trying to keep them focused on thinking a certain way and paying attention to a certain part of the puzzle for me. It's role-playing. The lead developer used to get down in the weeds too much and start making stuff up because it wanted to do the coding. But I'm like, no, you can't see the code. You're up in the cloud with me. But our developers, they're down on my laptop and they can look in the file. There's a pattern catalog. They're supposed to look them up. They're supposed to check the models, the domain models, before they do stuff. They're never supposed to invent new things. So there's this whole verification first protocol that is like seared into their mind.
When you say we, are you meaning you and these various personas?
Me and the bots. There's no other human involved in this project. So if I say the plural, it's me and these entities that you've endowed with some little bit of yourself and a little bit of whatever keeps them going, and when they play a role. A lot of it's content. In the end, for all the magic they do, it falls on the floor if I stop doing it. Like I'm the linchpin. I have to concentrate and pay attention and remember something's ready to hand over. But I also can go have dinner and come back and go, oh yeah, Cursor finished an hour ago. Here's the report. Oh, Cursor, here's your next assignment. Oh, code got stuck waiting for me to approve like a file command. Here's your approval, and then go back. I have to focus and I have to get it all together. And occasionally I have to have these planning discussions or else the whole thing would have gone astray. It's real work, like PM work, but the actual supervision is light for me once it's running smoothly.
So I think maybe this is a Claude thing, all this thing you're talking about with agents.
This is just a new thing with Claude today. They never could see before now. I always had to say, hey, you're almost full. Write me a whole handoff prompt that will tell your successor chat what we were doing. And I also have them keep a session log. So while I'm talking to them, they're creating and updating an artifact the whole time that is a log of everything, every decision we made and everything we did. I don't think I could use my workflow without that project functionality, because it's where all of the context and all of the learnings have accumulated and been created as ongoing received context for the future chats.
The way I deal with this context issue is that I get it to start helping me write a document, like a test plan or an architecture plan or something like that. And then I'll say, okay, I want you to test things, for example, and this is how you should test things. And in Superbase, you can't use statements like this, you have to test like that. And then I will ask it to help me write that document. So I'll go from telling it to help me write it, to review and revise the document, like the test guide or the technical guide or whatever. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. I find that it quite often adds a lot of extra stuff in that is just a lot of blah, blah, blah. That's not very helpful. And my value add quite often is going through a big mess of stuff and just cutting out the bullshit and putting things into a logical sequence, and then recognizing that there is internal consistency problems. And sometimes I solve those internal consistency problems myself. Sometimes I ask it to help me. I don't think of it as different agents or people, but I think of it as different documents or guides that it can help me develop and then use.
Yeah, you probably get a lot of the same value. The roles help me distinguish the conversations. Like, I'm having a different conversation with these different streams, and it helps me keep that all straight. I definitely use a lot of documentation, and I've learned that letting the tools read the documents is super helpful. That helps them know what was going on and why a thing was, and it helps with continuity a lot too. The thing that's working for me is talking to the tools and actually look at what's working for us. It's brought up a bunch of patterns that seem to be working, which is interesting. One is that if you verify things in advance, if you test as you go, if you can get a couple of agents working at once, and then if you track stuff very carefully and document it carefully, you can get this loop of increasing your discipline and rigor on the process and eventually your velocity. And it seems to be happening now. I have to actually ship something, or it could just be an elaborate fantasy that looks good and never delivers.
You said you want to have multiple bots working at once because they go away and do things for some time. When I'm using Cursor, it never takes more than a few minutes. Like, I can go and have a cup of coffee maybe at its longest. What are you doing that's taking a long time?
It's just taking a couple minutes, but usually not much longer than that. We've given code instructions that sometimes takes like 20 minutes to do, where it's essentially working through a whole GitHub issue, task by task, and testing them as they go and verify that each part works. All the unit tests still pass. All the regression set tests still pass. When I was debugging constantly, I never let any of these things gallop ahead. They had to bring me back results after every step of the way. And I'd go, no, that's not what I wanted. You did it wrong. I was constantly doing that. But now they're following prompts that were written for them by Sonnet. When Sonnet is writing the prompts based on a game plan that Opus came up with. And I'm, as a human, intervening when the quality of the prompting chain is not good enough. But when it does work, and which seems to be working now, I can give Claude and Cursor both these multi-step, multi-phase efforts, and they can grind through them. And if they get stuck sometimes or seem to be having a problem, I sometimes have to intervene. But a lot of times they both finish up, and I was busy in a meeting or something, and then I go look and go, oh, they're both done. And I bring back the videos to the developer, and it says, that looks great. Then you want me to give them step 2? And I'm like, yeah, give them that.
Yeah, I guess if you're doing this while you're working around your day job with your meetings and everything, I can understand.
Especially when I started, I was also doing it as an obsessed maniac, like all weekend long, because I was really enjoying it. It's so fun, and I'm making something, and when it works, it's fun, and when it's broken, it's like a crossword puzzle that I'm trying to solve.
Yeah. So there's huge promises being made from OpenAI and Lovable and other things. Type in a few words, describe what you want, and in the ad, all this beautiful UI start appearing that's absolutely perfect and does what you want, and people are clicking on things and entering things, and it's all flowing through beautifully. And my experience is that is a million miles away from what it's really like. Deloitte, Accenture, McKinsey, Bain, BCG are going into companies and telling CEOs that the world is changing, we're going through a revolution, they have to get on board or they're going to be left behind. And so they're spending a fortune, $1 million for 6 consultants for 6 weeks, 4 of them who are associates, $6,000 to $20,000 a day each. They know nothing practical. It's all theory. They assume that everything that OpenAI and everybody else is promising is true because they don't know. And so they start saying, you don't need designers anymore because there's this design tool. Same with programmers, and they're just working out who you can fire by replacing them with AI. Everything I'm reading on Reddit is saying it is a rapidly moving disaster that is not producing any of the results that the consulting companies or OpenAI or anybody else are claiming. In fact, model threat research found that developers thought that they were 20% more effective using AI on open source projects. Actually, the research shows that they were 19% less effective. So there are improvements if you use it well, and people like us are able to use it to build projects that we could never build before.
And that's what I'm hearing. You couldn't have done this before, and now you can have a go at it and achieve things that you couldn't achieve. The reason I don't use automated design tools is because I'm a designer and I can do that fast. But somebody who isn't a designer, throwing their idea into something to generate some initial concepts, that lets them move from nothing to something where I don't need it because I can do something really quick. And that is a different use case to replace your professionals with tools that are effectively junior.
Yeah. Look, I think replace your professionals with AI tools is complete bullshit, and everyone's going to be badly burnt by that.
You don't replace somebody with a telephone or typewriter. You eventually hire fewer people because some things aren't done by hand anymore. You don't replace people with tools. That's never worked.
But what I like is I'm going to expand my capabilities by learning how to use that tool. I'm going to open up new possibilities for myself and my organization. I'm going to be able to build some products. Maybe they'll make some money. And I might actually learn to be a real designer who just uses AI tools to automate some things.
Yeah, I think the fact that they stole my books so that other people can get writing cheaply makes me sad. But now all those people who wrote Stack Overflow posts, their stuff was stolen, and now I get code for free, and someone else gets design for free, and someone else gets marketing advice for free, and somebody else gets help organizing their life for free or whatever. And the net is maybe a lot of people can do more stuff if we don't let it become totally predatory. I have nothing but disdain for this ecosystem of CEOs and consultancies milking investors and customers in this ill-conceived approach to all of this stuff. It reminded me of the dawn of the internet in terms of it's a real game-changing thing. But there was also the dot-com boom and bust because it was oversold too soon. All those things were going to be true eventually. A lot of people tried to make money pretending they were already true and cashing in on them early. And like any Ponzi scheme, some got out and a lot of people were left holding the bag. That is definitely going to happen again with AI. They are definitely going to eliminate jobs and realize that they screwed their company or have to replace people and get new jobs. There's a lot of wreckage coming for sure, and a lot of real disruption. I'm not happy about any of that. I do think, like you, that those of us who like tech and geeky stuff and making things ought to figure out what this stuff can and can't do and whether it gives us any capabilities, because I think in the coming chaos of disruption, having your own plan or your own grip on it is at least a way of charting your own path through it rather than just having it happen to you.
Yeah, I agree. I love that I can build something again. And in many ways, it's like having a programmer sitting next to me who can do some stuff, teach me stuff. I can look at it and go, why are you doing this? It can explain it to me that way. And the more I learned, the better that AI gets.
I agree. Also, one thing I thought about lately is that, the real world of UX and product and making software is compromise. And that's a good thing mostly. Like often you get something greater than the sum of its parts, but often sometimes it's like compromising on the user experience, compromising on the ethics, compromising on other things because of the business case or because of the realities of money and time and things like that. And at least with this project I'm doing right now, I get to do things the way I want to do them. If I want to refactor it, I can refactor it. If I want to have an ethical structure baked into my AI so that it literally cannot do certain things that I think AI should not do, I can try that idea out.
I have a few learnings from this, but I wonder, Donna, if you would like to do a summary.
The things that I noted that I heard from both of you was very much about learning. Like you said it a bunch of times about how this is helping you learn things you couldn't do before and now can, and how the learning of it is really valuable. At one point, Christian, you said that the value in using AI to produce your product was, number one, learning, number two, sharing, and number three, if the product is useful to you, but really you emphasize that learning process. One of the other things that wove through was breaking the blank page by using AI tools to help you think, to give you feedback, to help you think about things that you hadn't thought yet. I did also note, Christian, you said you were verifying in advance what you need to do, testing as you go, sending the bots off to do that work and checking in at the end. And using that process was giving you good outcomes, that you weren't getting rubbish code and making shit up. Also, you talked earlier about empathizing with your developer colleagues around stuff that we hear them say all the time, learning how to understand what other people are experiencing makes me a better designer, probably makes you a better product manager. And then, Murray, you said that the more I learn, the better the AI assistant gets. The more I learn, the better the thing gets. So that's why I thought I would wrap up with that. The value of this is learning.
Yeah, and you still have to keep that little bit of skepticism that everybody has where they're like, in my area, it's not that good, but it seems great in every other area. It's probably 80% good or maybe mediocre good in those other areas, but in some areas, that's adequate with sufficient structure. I've found, because I have my own design standards or taste, that I have been very unhappy with image and logo design. And I've got a designer friend of mine that I'm paying real money to make a real logo for me because it seems like you can't fake that.
I've had AI generate icons. I throw them into the prototype so that the client knows what I'm thinking, but then the client gets a human to make a nice, consistent set of icons. It's faster than me fucking around in Illustrator.
I wasted at least a month and some money trying to make an animated video for a song that I had recorded. And it was that Rocket to Mars thing where you go, hey, ChatGPT, I want to make a rocket to Mars. And it's great. Go down to Home Depot and get some pipe and some dynamite, and we're going to go. And then later on, you're like, I blew up my hands. Why did you do that? And it'll say, oh, yeah, that was never going to work.
A couple things that I want to explore more is personas. I don't think of the AI tools I have as being part of a team. I don't think it's true, but I can maybe explore that a bit more. The second thing is test-driven development. I am getting Cursor to do some test cases for me, and it's going pretty well, but I think I could explore that a lot more.
I would recommend looking into domain-driven design as well. It's a way of building your architecture with very strong separations of concern and models that separate the data layer and the workflow layers all from each other. And you have to have these strict contracts between the layers. Once I adopted that as an architectural basis, it has helped contribute to a lot of this discipline that I'm talking about.
Yeah, the very first thing I did after I wrote my product spec was develop my database model.
It's a very similar concept. The domain model is supposedly one layer above the database model, but it's about having your structure in place before you build out.
And then one thing I've learned is that Cursor was building monolithic components, which were very hard to debug and very buggy. So I have moved to a series of small, independent, functional components. It's centered around a particular thing. Like I have a person table, so I've got some functions centered around person. This is object-oriented design and development. And I found that it's so much better when you can break your monolithic component down into a whole lot of small things, which are orchestrated from the front end.
Yeah, similar. I've also landed on microservice approach to keep all those things long.
I found that when whatever you're working with gets more than, say, 500 lines, the AI starts to really struggle and get things wrong. So I find that I have to keep breaking things down into smaller parts, and it works much better.
Yeah, I think that's a general pattern. They get overwhelmed and you have to break it down. They'll say yes to stuff and try to do it and then get stuck because it's too much.
Yeah. Anything you've learnt you want to share, Christian?
A lot of things. I've often been like, hey, I'm a UX person and I've done zero UX. I'm designing this for myself, like one of the classic sins of UX. I'm using so-called genius design, where I just assume I know how things should work. Everything I knew went out the window. On the other hand, I was being a product manager and leaning into my more current profession and leveraging that. But I didn't do some of the things I would have done in the real world to prove a product idea out. I'm not regretting it. But all those things that I already know how to do are relevant just because some of the work might now be executed with the assistance of or actually by some of these tools. It hasn't completely flipped the whole thing on its head. And one thing I've learned was that the things that we do to define and think through and think about things systematically or architecturally pays off, because none of these tools that we use can keep that much context straight and get their work done. So you as the human have to either know that or write it in a doc they can look at.
All right. Normally at this point, I would ask people to share a book or something about this topic that would be useful, but I don't know if there is any actually helpful online resources from people who are doing this would be good.
I've been following Jorge Arango's work for quite a while, and while people were still poo-pooing this, he was exploring RAG searches and things like that. And I was starting to understand the pros and cons of it by watching his work. He's an information architect and consultant based in the U.S., out of Panama. And I'm publishing this newsletter called Building Piper Morgan. It's a way of me kind of narrating the experience from the trenches.
All right. Thanks for coming on.
It's been wonderful catching up. It's so great to see you too, Todd.
You too.
That was No Nonsense Leadership from Murray Robinson and Donna Spencer. If you'd like to explore better ways to develop software products and services, contact Donna on LinkedIn and Murray at evolve.co. That's Evolve with a 0. Thanks for listening.